Hello and welcome back. Today we will be doing a little bit of a technology tier list update sort of thing, talking about patch 1.5. You can see we're in 1.5.2 in the open beta right now, and we are going to be talking about the top 5 winners and losers of production technology as a result of 1.5 changes. Now, the biggest change, just to kind of quickly touch on it, is the appearance of local prices, which pull stuff towards their local price, and this is going to, generally speaking, be inefficient, and it's going to make it so that you want to have, locally integrated economies. So for example, here in Xi'an, we are producing a lot of sulfur, and then we are also producing fertilizer plants and synthetic plants. The fertilizer feeds into the sulfur, the sulfur feeds into the fertilizer, which feeds into the synth plants. And so we have economies that are vertically integrated, and this is going to be produce efficiency, and this is going to be kind of one of the bigger things that is informing the overall texture of the changes in terms of which production techs are best. Also, just to kind of quickly note, the way we're evaluating technologies is the kind of question we're asking ourselves is, how likely am I going to research this technology as soon as it's available? And this is the primary metric upon which we're evaluating technologies, because you get all the technologies eventually, and so it's not this or that type of a, sort of thinking about things, and instead we're just, evaluating it from the perspective of how likely am I going to research this immediately, not is this tech really, really, really strong as we get into the late game. So something like this. So some techs might be essential, like super late game, like for example, rotary valve engine might be really good, as you start running out of labor. But if you're not running out of labor as soon as it becomes available, it's generally not going to be a very good tech to pick up. And so we'll kind of try to note some of these inflection points as we talk about it. And let's get started. Okay, so the first category we're going to start with is the top 5 winners, because I think these are a bit more straightforward. As a result of, kind of building local economies, what you want to do is you want to build local economies around, construction. Specifically, you are looking for places with iron mines and coal mines, because these are going to allow you to produce steel, which is going to allow you to produce tools. We don't have any tools right here, but we can find a place with tools, coal, steel, or iron, steel, and they all feed into each other, and this is part of the essential construction loop. And so being able to build all in one province, specifically the ones that have iron and coal, is valuable. And so the first one we have is reinforced concrete is a big winner here. And this gives 15% construction sector throughput, which has always been nice. But as you start to want to have, more construction sectors in key provinces, rather than just being okay smattering your construction sectors around, reinforced concrete also tends to get a lot better, in the grand scheme of things. And also, they benefit a lot from kind of one of the better techs in tier 3, getting a lot worse, but we'll talk about that later. To the lesser extent, or to also kind of keep this in mind, we have number 4 is pneumatic tools, which is going to give a resource discovery chance of building hardwood output and construction sector throughput. This is a bit of a winner, although hardwood output, generally speaking, hardwood prices seem to get very depressed with the current iterations of things. I'm expecting that to change once they add cannons a little bit, and hardwood might become really good again, but for now, the resource discovery is also pretty nice, because gold is really good in this patch, as even better than 1.4, and then oil is also quite strong. But this construction sector building throughput is really going to benefit both reinforced concrete and pneumatic tools, because it means you will be able to be more vertically integrated, and you will be able to get more construction sectors out of your key states. And so this is why these are in 4th and 5th place winners. And the next winner is going to be kind of one we looked at a little bit here with the synthetic plants idea, is because your local economies, you will have to pay more for input goods if you are getting them from outside of the local state, and you will pay less, or you will get less for goods that you are selling outside of the state. We have Analine. So in the events, there is some context. This is one, it's probably not overall that good, but it is a winner, and it's still not going to be a tech you research like as soon as you can, but relative to before, it's much better, because if you have a lot of sulfur and you don't have dyes, the synthetic plant building will be pretty reasonable. The sulfur PM is extraordinarily strong. It's very, very efficient, and so if you can create demand for sulfur, this will be good, and your clothing industries will be much more efficient if you are building dyes as well. And so we can take a look at a province like, for example, Sicily comes to mind, really having this level 100 sulfur mine, which is also benefiting from this 20% sulfur mines building throughput, you know, you really want to leverage this. But then if you're producing a bunch of sulfur and you're selling it to states other than this, the local price of sulfur, you will have a balance that's super positive, and you can see here the local price for sulfur is less. And when the local price for sulfur is less, this means our building will be less profitable. So you want to create local buy orders and not have as big a positive balance. Well, what's one way you could do that? Well, you can make fertilizer, which they are doing here, but you can also, you know, go for aniline, which notably, the PM for the synthetic plants, one of the inputs is sulfur. And so you get this nice little thing where you're building into the sulfur, you're having this locally integrated economy, you're building into the sulfur, into the fertilizer, into the synthetic plants, and then this is producing dyes, and so you want to build clothing. And fortunately, in a state like Sicily, if I'm not mistaken, they have access to both cotton plantations and silk plantations. So you're going to be able to get all the inputs for clothing in order to build clothing relatively high, and so this will be pretty good. And so while it's not going to be, you know, a slam dunk for most countries, and for most countries you'll just kind of let aniline that spread, I think there will be more situations now where you end up researching aniline yourself, and so we have it in third place as the winner. And finally, in first and second, we have a tie, and that is between nitroglycerin and dynamite, with dynamite probably being in first place and nitroglycerin being in second, just based on the texture of, you know, the tree, where the tier 2 techs are generally going to be more researchable, and you're going to want to push for them more early than the tier 3 techs, you know, in terms of the construction techs, because like water tube boiler is insane. But what these are is, the biggest difference is now the boom booms are their own separate building, and they're very, very efficient. And you want to go mines because you're again trying to do the construction loop of iron, coal, and steel all in one place, and that really benefits if you can build the explosives, which also refeed the goods into the mines and also create buy orders for the mines. So we're creating buy orders for sulfur, iron, coal, and then we are creating explosives, and then these explosives are being consumed in the same spot. And so, you know, in terms of local prices, it is going to be, well, here we are producing a lot of explosives, but it is going to be much better, you know, and we're going to have much more even prices. And when you have a completely even balance, like say we have on lead here, or not on lead, when you have roughly even, you know, inputs and outputs, you know, we have roughly even inputs and outputs of some of these goods, like, for example, energy, which of course is going to make sense. The buildings will generally be more efficient because the prices will get pulled off less. Like, so for example, sulfur here, we don't have an enormous glut of sulfur because we have a decent chunk of buy orders. You know, we are overproducing by around 2K, which is slightly depressing the local price, but it's not way off. And so this is perhaps a good example of how producing, you know, things in the same spot can be good. So, you know, this is really going to benefit dynamite and nitroglycerin, not just because the boom booms are their own building, and so you're ditching a ton of the inefficiency you had from, you know, being stuck in with the fertilizer, but also you're really benefiting quite a lot by, this is something that is forced having economy, or having local, you know, vertical economies within the construction loop of caring about iron and coal. Even if you don't have sulfur in a place, these are going to be really good. So those are the biggest winners, you know, kind of overall. There are some other winners that are like conditional winners, you know, like Bessemer process and open hearth process, because some companies require having these technologies, some unique companies, but overall, you know, these are not a huge deal. Okay, so let's talk about the losers, the top 5 losers overall. And before we talk about the top 5, just want to reiterate, most of these ones that have lost out are still extremely strong and are some of the better technologies. But I think it's important to emphasize how they've kind of lost, and even though they're still really strong. Okay, so the first up, we're actually going to have an honorable mention, and that honorable mention is Mechanized Workshops. They are losing out because economies of scale becomes less important. Before, you used to build, you know, like a tooling workshop in one province up super high, and then maybe clothing in a different province, and now you have to build everything in one province, and so that means you tend to build the buildings wide rather than tall, and so very often on a lot of countries, you will not be able to push a level 31 building around the time Mechanized Workshops workshop is researchable. Again, keeping in mind that our heuristic is not how good is this tech overall, it is how likely am I going to research this tech as soon as I am able to. And so if you can't really, push up economies of scale to 31, Mechanized Workshop takes a little bit of a back burner, but it's still pretty good because you're getting the sewing machines, mechanized looms, and mechanized workshops. Notably, for mechanized workshops, I think that specifically this PM is going to be really, really nice, in the context of what's going on in the rest of, the game. Let's find a furniture manufacturing, because the mechanized workshops will really turn up the overall amount of furniture you're doing. And I think furniture is going to start looking quite a bit better because you want to build up the wood, and you will have local economies, more local economy for wood and tools than you will like with the clothings with a lot of your runs, where, if you go on to like Craftsman thing, for a lot of runs, you will not have local silk or local dyes. You'll just have maybe local fabric and local tools. And so you will overall have more buy and sell orders on the furniture. And so emphasizing furniture earlier on might be better. And so to some extent, mechanized workshops might make up for that, up for the fact that, you are losing out on, you're probably not building to EOS with too many countries that can research this as soon as you can research it. And so they do suffer a little bit. Next up, it suffers is railways. Now, railways is a bit of an interesting one that suffers because you're wanting to build in one province, so in theory you want more infrastructure. But I think that, so first of all, they nerfed the railway PMs across the board. They generally have less inputs and less outputs, which effectively makes them, even though their ratios are somewhat similar, they're effectively less of a building than they were before. They also now cost 800 construction, although they might have been a 450 construction cost before, and everything got boosted by around 30%. And so if this is one of the ratio might still be the same, but the PMs overall are not as good. And we also have the experimental trains PM that is inserted before the steam trains, and so you don't even get the full entry-level steam train when you research railways. And on top of all this, to some extent, you can delay infrastructure a little bit with gas streetlights, which are going to give infrastructure as well. If you can kind of spread out your economies a little bit, you can overall, I think, overcome, the construction cost that is inserted into, the construction sectors, which now have a greater construction cost, a greater infrastructure cost. I think you can overcome this enough with the increase of infrastructure that you are getting from the urbanization. And so I think you can slightly delay the railways. The PMs are worse. Also, the PMs for rail transportation are now a lot worse because transportation is a local good as well, and so you can't turn these on as well, and they will require a high level of micromanagement in order to get absolutely perfect, and this is not necessarily always doable. And so from a practical perspective, being unable to turn on the railway PMs is also a bit of a suffering. Also, you'll generally have a bunch of transportation in these urban areas, and then you will want to be able to turn on OPMT, the more agrarian buildings for this, and you can't do that anymore. And so I think railway suffers, but again, still going to be, because you're wanting to build tall in one place, railways is still going to be a really important tech to research, but I do think it suffers, and so it suffers as a result of 1.5, so it gets deprioritized a little bit. Okay, next up in fourth place, we have electrical generation. And the big one for this is electricity is now a local good. And one, we do have the practical tedium aspect. But two, the really big PM that you get from it is electric sawmills, or this is what you got before, which was really, really strong PM. And now you can't really use electric sawmills very effectively because you can't build electricity in a ton of places very effectively, or it's very, very, very buggy. They might fix the bugs, but you get huge overexpansion. Let's assume you don't get overexpansion. You now cannot loud cars outside. You now cannot build up the electricity in one place, and you instead have to spread it out, and you will lose out on economies of scale, and you'll have to build one of these 800 cost buildings in order to employ maybe a quarter of it in order to turn on your electric sawmills, because you don't have these huge wood lumber areas that are necessarily 20 plus levels. And so generally speaking, it's going to be, when you first get onto this, it's going to be a lot worse. And this is important to emphasize. When you first get on electrical generation initially, it's going to be a lot worse, and it's going to be less important to unlock early on because we are, the benefit of this wood is not as good, and the benefit of electric fences, when we want these in rural areas that don't have we don't want to build our electricity there, generally speaking, it's going to suffer. However, what we do have here is going to be electrical streetlights, and this is going to be really, 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 really strong later, especially as you get into the later of society techs, when you are getting this minus urbanization per urban center modifier in a bunch of places, then it will become quite strong, because what this will do is it will give enormous amount of infrastructure via electric streetlights to your areas that are heavily urbanized, which will allow you to build fewer railways. But this is not going to be extremely strong right when you unlock it, and so as a consequence, electric railways generally suffer, and also, just kind of quickly touching on capacitors and electric railways, these are also going to suffer in techs because you won't necessarily have built electricity everywhere, and so you can't swap these PMs on in as many places. But these didn't make one of the losing this didn't make one of the losers top 5, both electrical capacitors and electric railways. But you do have to keep in mind that not being able to swap on everywhere as soon as you build something, like on electric sawmills, or not being able to swap on sewing machines everywhere, this is going to make overall the technology suffer. However, you will be able to locally integrate electricity with a lot of stuff, so it'll be okay, but it'll be much more slow thing, and so it's not necessarily something you want to rush. In third place, we have Combustion Engine. Now, this is still a strong tech, but overall, it does look like they made the military PM for this significantly worse, because it's not giving offense and defense currently. It's giving like transportation speed, something like this. Also, cars, while POPs will consume cars, they're still not a very good investment in terms of oil, and they increase the employment required on your motor industries, and so they're generally not going to be very good. Public motor carriages is decent, but it will consume transportation, which very often you are crimped on anyways, and so being able to turn this on is less good, because we're trying to turn on transportation, on all the mines, for example, and so it's generally we're trying to turn on rail transportation for the mines in our heavily industrial areas, remembering that we're building coal, iron, steel all in one spot, and so often turning on this PM will not be immediately available. The chainsaws is a joke of a PM. It's the worst PM in the game, and then we have combustion engine derricks, which this PM is pretty good, but you can just delay this. Also, in general, if you have oil and you are having access to oil such that the combustion engine derricks will be good, you'd much rather research plastics in almost every scenario for this. And so combustion engine is really not going to be a tech that you're going to prioritize very early on at all, and so it suffers quite a lot. It's still like a good tech in the abstract, but you're not going to rush it very much, like ever. Next up, we have in second place, we have shift work. Shift work gives plus 20 to economies of scale because of the way local prices are affecting, things. Shift work is going to become much less important because you're building entire economies wide in a single place, and so you're not getting up to 51 as fast. And on top of that, construction costs for all buildings are like plus 33 to plus 80%. And generally the economy has been slowed down because MAPI, that's the market access price impact, is negatively affecting economies. It's strictly either you are even with where you are at 1.4, or it's a debuff, and it's almost always a debuff, and then more construction costs and these types of things. And so it's generally really, really difficult to, at the very point in time you can research shift work, be building things up to level 51. It's very, very rough, especially because you are going to be building local economies around your construction sectors. So for example, by the time I can research the shift work, I'll probably have a level 20 construction center center that's on iron frame buildings. It's not going to make much sense for me to try and push iron to level 51 and coal to 51 here, or it's going to make some sense but not as much sense as it would be to push iron and coal in a new state where I can push a level 20 construction sector as well, and this further will like compound it. Now eventually shift work again is going to be an outstanding tech, but is really heavily deprioritized from 1.4, and I think that as soon as you can research shift work, the number of countries that you're going to research it immediately on is very close to zero. It's maybe China, and this might be it, and that's mainly because China will get access to it late anyways, and so they will be closer to 51s and have a bunch of like economies already pretty built up, or a bunch of buildings already built up by the time they get to shift work, because they start out technologically behind. And so generally speaking, shift work really suffers. They suffer a lot. You know, the losers suffer a lot more than the winners, and while it's a good tech, it's not going to be that good, you know, super early. And then finally, we have an interesting one. Again, this tech is good, and that's lathes. So the main benefit of lathes is it unlocks a bunch of PMs that allow you to switch from merchant guild ownership on your buildings to capitalist ownership, and so you can start, you know, industrializing and moving your laws in a better direction and moving towards laissez-faire and this type of things. And normally lathes is a very strong tech, and it is normally unlocked for most Western nations, and then, you know, you kind of want to unlock it for a lot of less industrialized nations at early on in the game, but you're almost never going to be researching at the very start, and there is a pretty strong reason for this, and that is the MAPI. And that is, you are going to be researching society techs at game start if you are playing a backward country, and you are going to probably be researching at the very least stock exchange to get this plus 10% market access price impact, and you're also, I think, in a lot of countries, going to be researching romanticism in order to unlock agrarianism, because also the market access price impact, the bigger the market access price impact, the less you are disaffected by local prices, and the effects are quite large. Traditionalism gives you, you know, minus 15% on market access price impact, and so you want to get the number as high as possible, as quickly as possible, unless you just have an absolute perfect state. Here we have it at 85% in China, and so getting rid of the 15% from traditionalism is going to be really big, and the extra 10% from stock exchange is also going to be really big. And as a result, generally speaking, early on, you will very often just be minting cotton gin and lathes on these countries, and these will nat spread anyways to you, and so you'll know you'll be getting them. And so while lathes is a really important technology, you're almost never researching it now. I think that you're trying to pick up the society tech you need. Hopefully one of them nat spreads to you, but you are getting romanticism, you're picking up stock exchange, and you're maybe picking up corporatism in order to unlock a company, if you know, to get the construction speed and the throughput and all this. And so as a result of the society techs being a lot better in the, you know, tier 1, 2 kind of range, where you, like, the very early on, you know, lathes just takes a complete, like, back seat. And I think that you will be actively researching lathes much less often now, and usually you will not be actively researching it as soon as it's available, but instead prioritizing some of the society tech. And so those are the winners and losers of 1.5 as I see it so far. In the 1.2, you know, after the first kind of leap through, you know, some PMs have gotten better, some PMs have gotten worse, but I think the biggest thing is the MAPI changes. Just to quickly run through it real quick, the increased construction throughput on reinforced concrete and pneumatic tools is both going to be very strong, because this will allow you to build economies more local, which is really what you're looking for, so you don't have to eat inefficiency. Because if you have to build, you know, iron frame buildings in places where you don't have iron, they're going to have to pay more for that iron, and so this allows you to effectively get more construction sectors in good places. The next up, kind of in third place, is Analine, which, while it's not going to be one you research very often, there will be some situations where you have abundance of sulfur and no dyes, and Analine will be a decent shout, and maybe one you get kind of early on. And then finally, in the first and second place for the winners, we have Nitroglycerin and Dynamite, which really benefit quite a lot. you know, because they are consuming and producing stuff for mines, they will generally be very, very efficient because you won't have to eat MAPI penalties. To a lesser extent, Steam Donkey is maybe a little bit of a winner because it is going to consume coal, and it's going to be really good as a labor-saving PM on coal because it's producing and consuming in the same spot, and specifically in the places where you're building a lot of construction, you're maybe building engines too, and so it's going to look good for kind of similar reasons. But we're going to put Nitroglycerin and Dynamite as the first and second winners, with you know, probably, I forget which one I thought was a little bit better, probably Dynamite, because there are some really good tier 2 techs to research, namely water tube boiler, and you know, I still think in a lot of runs you're going to be researching railways first, even though nitroglycerin kind of is a bit of a winner for this patch. For the losers, we have honorable mention of Mechanized Workshop, followed by railways as a loser, but you're still going to very often research railways before nitroglycerin because it is important. If you're out of infrastructure, you just need it. You know, all the PMs for railways are worse, you know, because you can't put the rail transportation on all the plantations, and also the PMs for all of the railroads themselves are just worse. And this is, they have increased inputs and decreased inputs and outputs, which functionally means you need more of them. You're also not going to be able to turn on public trams as soon as you research this very often, you know, or even that close, because of like the way your transport supply is going to be crimped. They might buff it. We're still in just the first kind of passage of this, or the first update to the open beta, and so they might buff railways, but right now it's a little bit weak, and so if you can get away with it, you want to. And also you're getting infrastructure from lighting in the urban centers, whether you're on you know, the coal lighting or the gas street lights or electric street lights. So that does suffer. Electrical generation, generally a bit more clunky. You can't turn on all the PMs immediately, and so this one suffers. To a lesser extent, electrical capacitors, and this one are also in kind of the same crew. Combustion engine suffers a lot as well. The PM for the automobiles looks worse in terms of the military, and then we also have combustion engine derricks. You're almost never going to be able to put that in, you know, or you're going to almost always want plastics before you want that. And then finally, we do have the public motor carriages, which are going to be very difficult to turn on generally because of the way transportation seems to roll out, just as a consequence of everything. And you might be able to turn it on a little bit easier once you get on electric railways, but this is not going to be a priority in the combustion engines. Shift work greatly suffers because you are building wide economies in local areas instead of tall economies in a bunch of different areas, and so you're almost never going to be able to make use of the plus 20 economies of scale building cap as soon as you can research shift work. Definitely is still a really strong technology, but it's never going to be one you prioritize anymore. It's going to be rare, really rare. And finally, the biggest sufferer is lathes, which is more on the back of society tech just getting a lot better, but I think that actively researching lathes is probably a bit of a mistake now, especially because you will usually nat spread cotton gin into lathe exactly, and you will not nat spread, you know, the exact society techs you want very often. Although if you are, you will often prioritize lathes in that specific context. And so that's kind of the winners and losers as I see it in terms of the top 5 for patch 1.5. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, etc. By the etc. I mean, you know, hit the notification bell. And other than that, have a good day.